In the heart of Africa, where borders blur and jungles stretch for miles, a man rose to power not through politics or wealth, but through fear. His name was Joseph Kony. To some, he called himself a prophet, chosen by God to lead a revolution. To millions of others, he was nothing more than a ruthless warlord, one of the most wanted men on earth. Kony was born in Uganda in the early 1960s, in a village near the Nile. He grew up during a time of civil war and political chaos, where violence and instability were part of everyday life. At first, he was just another young man, a healer's son who served as an altar boy in church. But over time, Kony began to claim he had spiritual powers. He said he could talk to spirits, command them, and use them to protect himself in battle. To his followers, this gave him an almost supernatural authority. By the late 1980s, Uganda was recovering from decades of brutal regimes. But in the north, resentment against the government was strong. Kony seized this moment. He declared himself leader of a new movement, the Lord's Resistance Army, or LRA. His message was simple but terrifying. He claimed he was fighting to rule Uganda according to the Ten Commandments. But behind this religious mask, his army was built on violence, fear, and blood. What made the LRA infamous was not its ideology but its methods. Kony's soldiers raided villages, burning homes, slaughtering men, and abducting women and children. Boys were forced to become child soldiers. Girls were enslaved as so-called wives to Kony's commanders. Families were torn apart in the dead of night, and thousands of children were forced to kill their own relatives to break their ties to home. The atrocities mounted year after year. Entire regions of northern Uganda lived in terror. Villages built makeshift camps, and tens of thousands of children began what became known as night commuting, walking miles each evening to sleep in town centers, where they hoped they would be safe from LRA abductions. International organizations began to take notice. In 2005, the International Criminal Court issued its first arrest warrants in history, and Joseph Kony was at the top of the list. He was charged with crimes against humanity, including murder, sexual slavery, and the forced conscription of children. He became a symbol of impunity, a man whose crimes shocked the conscience of the world. And yet, despite the world's outrage, Kony evaded capture. Uganda's military pushed him out of the north, but he moved into the lawless jungles of the Democratic Republic of Congo, then into the Central African Republic, and even Sudan. Each time international forces thought they had him cornered, he slipped away, hiding deep in the bush with his loyal fighters. In 2012, Kony's name exploded across the globe with the release of the viral documentary, Kony 2012. Overnight, millions of people who had never heard of Uganda or the LRA were suddenly demanding his arrest. Posters appeared in major cities, celebrities voiced support, and governments pledged to act. For a brief moment, Joseph Kony was the most wanted man on the internet. But viral campaigns do not end wars. The search for Kony continued, with US Special Forces and African Union soldiers deployed to track him down. They trained local troops, set up surveillance, and tried to cut off his supply lines. But Joseph Kony proved elusive. He communicated with his fighters using runners and hidden radios. He never stayed in one place for long. The jungle was his shield. Reports began to emerge of Kony growing older, weaker, and increasingly paranoid. Some former fighters who escaped described him as a man haunted by spirits, convinced that magic protected him from bullets. Others said he was ruthless to the end, killing anyone who dared question his authority. For the people of Central Africa, the scars remain. Over 100,000 people were abducted, and more than 2 million were displaced from their homes because of Kony's war. Survivors still carry the weight of trauma. Entire generations grew up in fear, and communities are still rebuilding what they lost. And yet, despite decades of searching, Joseph Kony has never been caught. Today, he is believed to be hiding somewhere in the remote forests that border Sudan, South Sudan, and the Central African Republic. The world's most powerful armies have failed to bring him to justice. This raises a haunting question. How can one man, with no country, no government, and no real allies, continue to evade the world? Some say he is already dead, his body hidden by loyal fighters. Others believe he is still alive, a ghost wandering the jungles, waiting for his story to fade into silence. But for the victims, the survivors, and the families torn apart, silence is not an option. They continue to speak, to remember, and to demand justice. Joseph Kony may have built his power on fear and superstition. He may have terrorized a continent. But history will remember him not as a prophet, not as a liberator, but as a warlord who turned children into weapons and waged war against his own people. The question that remains is whether justice will ever catch up with him, or whether Joseph Kony will remain one of the most wanted men who was never found. Behind the curtain, we bring you the stories the world was never meant to hear.